Welcome to Table Talk. My name is Brett, pastor at the table in Saxe, Texas, and here's my big idea for today. So most of us believe that the world needs to change. The question is, how will that change come about? In other words, will it happen by changing systems and structures, or will it happen by changing individual hearts and minds? So these philosophies of change span many different political and religious perspectives, but the ways that they differ is it's often like more sensed than really clarified and named. So, for example, I grew up in a religious tradition, evangelical Christianity, that tended to focus more on the changing of individual hearts and minds. We really weren't that into political organizing, at least at the grassroots level. I mean, we'd like go and vote and things, but we really focused on the one-to-one change that happens as I interact with the person in front of me. Now, this was particularly true when I was younger. Over the years, that started to shift, but like I'm thinking when I was, this is 30 years ago, it was more that. So everything was very local, it was very hands-on. But it firmly believed that this is how change happens, right? One heart, one mind at a time. So for example, if you wanted to see the divorce rates plummet or the percentage of people in poverty cut drastically, the idea was you worked with them at the one-to-one individual level. For example, the influential Tibetan Buddhist leader and teacher, the Dalai Lama, in 2017, he said, "Change in the world always begins with an individual who shares what he or she has learned and passes it on to others." You can kind of hear there a certain emphasis on the individual. However, as I grew up, I learned that there was another approach to change. This perspective believes that change happens at the systemic and structural level first. And then through that systemic change, it impacts the individual. For example, if you want to eliminate poverty, the idea is then you look at the broader systems, the structures that create the circumstances in which poverty flourishes. Or if you want to reduce the divorce rates, then you analyze, again, the systems that create the circumstances in which divorce runs rampant. Same for abortion, same for alcoholism or any other social ill. So why this pendulum swing? Why this either or approach? Well, both perspectives have their own great insight. Those emphasizing the individualistic perspective want to make sure that the idea of, for example, personal responsibility is not simply ignored and done away with. And I think there's truth in that. They're right to do that. Any psychologist can tell you that learning to take responsibility for your life, this is a huge step towards maturity. However, those emphasizing the systemic side of things want to make sure we understand that the context in which people take responsibility is a very big deal and cannot be ignored. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, it can be cruel to tell a man without boots to pull himself up by his bootstraps. And so it's easy, right, to look at, for example, the homeless and say, well, they got to take personal responsibility for their lives. Yeah, and there's truth in that. And yet, on the other hand, we also know that anywhere from around 25% of the homeless struggle with mental disorders, right? So you can see how homelessness, that crisis, is also a systemic mental health crisis. It's not as simple as saying, get your act together. So what's the punchline? What am I driving at here? How does change in our world happen? The answer is, of course, that we don't have to choose the individual or the systemic. We can work along both lines at once. This is true in our personal lives. This is true in our politics, in our churches, in our communities. And yet too often we're so beholden, often to our political party's way of seeing, that we turn a blind eye to the truth in the other. So left-leaning political folks emphasize the systemic, conservatives emphasize the individual. But this is one of those areas where seeing the truth in both will probably get us further in the long run. This is a quote from theologian Jurgen Moltmann. He's a Christian theologian, and he puts it this way: change yourself, some say, and then your circumstances will also change. The kingdom of God is supposed to have to do with, only with persons. Unfortunately, the circumstances will not oblige. Capitalism, racism, and the inhuman technocracy quietly develop in their own way. The causes of misery are no longer to be found in the inner attitudes of men, but have long been institutionalized. Change the circumstances, others say, and men will change with them. The kingdom of God and freedom is supposed to be a matter only of circumstance and structure. Unfortunately, Men will not oblige. Breakdowns in marriage, drug addiction, suicide, alcoholism continue undisturbed. Structures which make people unhappy can be broken down, but no guarantee is attached that men will be happy. Thus, both must be done at the same time. End quote. That's all for today. If you like this video, please click the like button, comment, share it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or anywhere you can find podcasts by searching Brett Tilford Table Talk. Grace and peace.